The crown felt heavier than the sword that had just taken my brother's head. I stood in the throne room, blood pooling at my feet. His blood, their blood, the blood of every noble who had laughed when father declared me unfit to rule. Behind me, Zerath's massive form blocked the shattered remains of the stained glass windows, his scales the color of midnight storms. The dragon's golden eyes surveyed the carnage with satisfaction, smoke still curling from his nostrils. "Your Majesty," the surviving courtiers whispered, dropping to their knees. The same lips that had called me the weak princess now trembled with my new title. 3 years ago, they had cast me out. Today, I had returned with fire and fury. But to understand how a discarded princess became the Dragon Queen, you need to know what they did to me first. I was 15 when father first said it. We were in this very throne room, though it looked different then. Pristine white marble, unmarred by dragon fire. The court had gathered for my younger brother Edmund's birthday celebration, and father had too much wine. "A toast!" he bellowed, raising his goblet. "To Prince Edmund, who will one day make a fine king." The court erupted in cheers. I stood frozen beside mother's empty throne. She had died giving birth to Edmund, and father never let me forget whose life had paid for his precious heir. "Father," I said quietly, "I'm your eldest. The throne should—" The slap came so fast I didn't see it. I only felt the sting across my cheek and tasted blood where my teeth cut my lip. "You?" Father's voice dripped with contempt. "You couldn't even hold a sword properly during training. You faint at the sight of blood. You cry when the kennel master puts down sick hounds." He turned to the court, spreading his arms wide. "Can you imagine? Princess Lyanna, ruling Drakenhold? She'd surrender the kingdom to our enemies within a moon." The laughter started small, nervous titters from those testing the waters. When they saw father joining in, it became a roar. Edmund, barely 12, laughed loudest of all. "Perhaps she could rule the kitchens," my stepmother suggested from her place at father's side. Queen Isabel had married father 2 years after mother's death, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me I was the daughter of a ghost. Or better yet, a convent. The Silent Sisters would appreciate such a delicate disposition. More laughter. I stood there, cheeks burning, hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage I didn't yet know how to channel. That night, I made my first attempt to prove them wrong. I snuck into the armory, determined to master swordplay in secret. If I could show father I was strong, capable, fierce, maybe he would see me differently. I lasted exactly 3 nights before Edmund caught me. "Look what I found," he announced the next morning at breakfast, dragging me by my hair into the great hall. Our weak little sister playing with swords. Father's punishment was swift and cruel. He had me whipped, 10 lashes for theft of royal property, 10 more for conduct unbecoming a princess. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what came after. "You want to be a warrior?" father asked as I lay bleeding on the stone floor. "Fine, you'll train with the soldiers." For 6 months, he forced me to train with the castle guard, but not as a student, as a target. They were instructed to show no mercy, to treat me as they would any enemy. Every morning, I was dragged from my bed to face grown men who delighted in beating the princess who dared reach above her station. My ribs were broken 4 times, my left arm twice. I lost 3 teeth and gained more scars than I could count, and through it all, father would watch from the balcony, Edmund at his side, both of them smiling. "Had enough?" father would call down. "Ready to accept your place?" I never answered. I just picked up my sword, or tried to with whatever wasn't broken, and faced the next opponent. Isabel was subtler in her cruelty. She poisoned my food, nothing lethal, just enough to keep me weak and sick. She spread rumors that I was mad, like my mother had been. She intercepted letters from nobles who might have been allies, replacing them with forgeries that made me look unstable. "Poor thing," she would coo when I collapsed during court functions. The strain of trying to be something she's not. Perhaps we should consider alternative arrangements for her future. By alternative arrangements, she meant selling me off to the highest bidder, or the cruelest. She brought suitor after suitor to court, each worse than the last. Lord Garrett, who had buried 3 wives, Prince Demon from the East, known for his love of torture, Duke Marcus, who openly kept a harem of broken girls. "Choose one," Father commanded on my 18th birthday, "or I'll choose for you." I chose none. That night, I ran. I made it 3 days before Edmund's hunting party found me. They dragged me back in chains, and Father's rage was terrible to behold. "You want to leave so badly?" he roared. "Fine, go, but you go with nothing. No name, no gold, no claim to anything." He had me stripped in front of the entire court. Every scrap of clothing, every piece of jewelry, even the rings that had been my mother's. I stood naked and shivering as he pronounced his decree. "I declare Princess Lyanna dead. This creature, Eos, is no daughter of mine. Cast her out. If she returns, kill her on sight." They threw me from the gates in nothing but a rough sackcloth, barefoot in the snow. I heard Edmund's laughter following me into the frozen waste. I should have died that night. The mountains of Drakenhold were brutal in winter, and I had nothing, no food, no shelter, no weapons. I stumbled through the snow, feet numb, body failing, vision blurring. I collapsed at the base of Mount Tyron, the forbidden peak that loomed over our kingdom. As Ahanmanein, consciousness faded, I thought I heard Mother's voice calling me home, but it wasn't Mother who found me. It was Zerath. I woke in warmth, impossible, overwhelming warmth. My eyes opened to find myself in a vast cavern, lying on a bed of furs before a fire that burned without wood. The walls glittered with veins of gold and precious stones, and the air hummed with an energy I couldn't name. "You're awake." The voice was like distant thunder, and I turned to find myself staring at a creature from legend. The dragon was massive, 60 feet from snout to tail, with the scales that shifted from black to deep purple in the firelight. His eyes were molten gold, ancient and knowing. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt safe. "You're real," I whispered. "As real as your pain, little princess." Zerath lowered his great head until we were eye level. "I heard you crying in the storm. I tasted your rage on the wind. It called to me. Why save me?" "Because I recognize a kindred spirit." The dragon's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile. "Your kind hunted mine to near extinction. Your grandfather killed my mate, mounted her skull in your throne room. Your father wears her scales as armor, and you? They cast you out for the crime of being born wrong in their eyes." He was right. The dragon skull that decorated our throne room, the one Edmund loved to climb on as a child, I had never thought about it as anything more than decoration. Now I saw it for what it was, a trophy of genocide. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. "Don't apologize. Revenge is a language we both speak fluently." Zerath stretched his wings, and I gasped at their span, easily 100 feet. "Tell me, abandoned princess, if you had power, real power, what would you do?" I didn't hesitate. "I would burn them all." The dragon laughed, a sound like breaking mountains. "Then perhaps we can help each other." For the next year, I lived with Zerath in his mountain lair. He taught me things no human knew, the true history of our world, the secret ways of magic, the ancient pacts between dragons and men that had been broken and forgotten. "Your bloodline carries the gift," he explained. "Your mother's line, specifically. They called her mad because she heard dragon songs in her dreams. But it wasn't madness, it was memory. He taught me to speak in the dragon tongue, to read the old texts his kind had preserved. I learned that dragons weren't the mindless beasts of our stories. They were scholars, philosophers, guardians of knowledge humanity had tried to destroy, and they were not all dead. "My children survive," Zerath told me one night, "hidden, sleeping, waiting, the last clutch of eggs in all the world, preserved by magic and hope. But they need something I cannot give them." "What?" "A bond. Dragons are only born when they have a human to bond with. It's the price of the ancient pact. Without a worthy human, the eggs remain stone. Understood what he was offering. You want me to wake them. I want you to lead them. Become the dragon queen your ancestors were meant to be before fear and greed corrupted your bloodline. The ritual took 3 days. I sat in a circle of 5 eggs, each the size of a wine barrel, each pulsing with inner fire. Zerath taught me the words, the blood price, the opening of mind and soul required to forge the bond. When the first egg cracked, I felt it in my bones. A small dragon, scales the color of rubies, crawled into my lap and looked at me with eyes that mirrored my own. Ember, I whispered, and she chirped agreement. The others followed, Storm with his scales of silver white, Shadow black as night, Verdant green as spring forests, and Aegis, whose golden scales matched Zerath's eyes. 5 dragons bound to my soul. I felt their thoughts, their hunger, their absolute loyalty. And with them came something else. Power. Real, tangible power that sang in my veins. Now, Zerath rumbled with satisfaction, we teach you to use it. The dragon magic wasn't like the hedge wizardry I'd heard of in stories. It was primal, elemental. I learned to breathe smoke, to see through dragon eyes, to speak words that could shake stone. My body changed too, stronger, faster, harder to hurt. The scars from my father's abuse faded, replaced by faint scales along my spine that marked me as dragon bonded. My children, for that's what the young dragons became to me, grew rapidly. Within 6 months, they were the size of horses. Within a year, they could carry me in flight. And that's when the reports started reaching us. Your kingdom suffers, Zerath told me, showing me visions in the sacred flames. Your father's wars have emptied the treasury. Your brother's cruelty has sparked rebellions. Your stepmother bleeds the nobles dry with taxes to fund her luxuries. I saw it all, the famines in the outer provinces, the executions of anyone who spoke against the crown, the selling of positions to the highest bidder, regardless of competence. Drakenhold was dying under their rule. They're destroying everything, I whispered. Yes, and soon there will be nothing left to save. Zerath fixed me with his ancient gaze. Unless someone stops them. I spent another year preparing, not just training my body in magic, but gathering intelligence. Zerath's network of ravens brought news from across the kingdom. I learned which nobles were discontent, which generals questioned my father's judgment, which merchants had been ruined by Isabel's taxes. I also learned about Edmund. My brother had grown into a monster that made father look reasonable. He took whatever woman caught his eye, willing or not. He executed servants for spilling wine. He had built a private dungeon where he tortured prisoners for sport. Last week, he killed Lord Morrison's daughter, one report read, claimed she looked at him wrong. Morrison seeks justice but finds none. Lordad's. Morrison. I remembered him, a kind man who had once snuck me sweet cakes when father forgot to feed me as punishment. His daughter, Alara, had been my only friend before father forbade it. That was when I knew it was time. I'm going back, I told Zerath. Alone? Never alone. I looked at my dragons, now magnificent predators in their own right. We're going back. All of us. Zerath smiled that terrifying dragon smile. Then let me tell you about the others. Others? Did you think I was the last adult dragon in the world? No, little queen. We are few, but we exist. Hidden, waiting, watching. And we have been discussing your rise with great interest. 3 more dragons answered Zerath's call. Nightfall, an ancient female whose scales absorbed light. Ironclad, a scarred warrior who had survived 100 battles. And Whisper, a serpentine dragon who could become nearly invisible. Why would you help me? I asked them. Nightfall answered, her voice like grinding stone. Because you are the first human in 3 centuries to hatch a clutch. Because you carry the old blood truly, and because... She leaned close, and I smelled sulfur and storm winds. Your father wears my daughter's scales. I would see him burn. 9 dragons, 1 dispossessed princess, against a kingdom. It should have been impossible, But I had something more than dragons. I had 3 years of planning, of careful intelligence gathering, of identifying every weakness in my family's rule, and I had rage, pure, distilled, patient rage. The first step was securing allies. I sent messages to Lord Morrison and others who had been wronged. Not grand promises or threats, just simple notes. The true heir returns. Justice comes on dragon wings. Be ready. Some thought it a hoax. Others, desperate, chose to believe. I gave them proof. Edmund liked to hunt in the Thornwood, always taking the same path, always camping at the same clearing. He thought himself safe with his guard of 20 men. 20 men are nothing to dragons in the dark. We struck at midnight. Aegis and Storm took the sentries silently. Shadow and Ember herded the terrified soldiers into a group, and I walked into the firelight, no longer the weak girl they remembered. 3 years had transformed me. Where once I was soft, I was now lean muscle and dragon scale. Where once I cowered, I now stood straight. Where once my eyes held tears, they now held fire. Hello, brother. Edmund scrambled for his sword, but Verdant's tail knocked it from his hand. He fell to his knees, and for the first time in his life, my brother knew fear. Lyanna, but you're dead. Father said, Father says many things, most of them lies. I circled him slowly, my dragons matching my movements. Tell me, Edmund, do you remember the day you found me in the armory? That was years ago. Do you remember laughing as Father had me whipped? His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. You were breaking the law. Do you remember hunting me like an animal when I tried to run? Father's orders. Do you remember what you said when they threw me out naked in the snow? He was crying angst now, this brother who had tormented me all my life. Please. You said, finally, no more pretending the spare matters. Well, Edmund, the spare's back. And she brought friends. I could have killed him then. Every part of me screamed for it, but death would be too quick, too merciful. You're going to live, I told him. You're going to return to Father and tell him I'm coming. Tell him about the dragons. Tell him about the army gathering under my banner. Tell him that every cruelty he visited on me will be returned tenfold. I leaned close enough for him to see the scales along my jaw, the vertical pupils my eyes had developed. And tell him that when I take the throne, you'll all beg for the kindness you denied me. Shadow grabbed Edmund in his claws and flew him back toward the capital, dropping him at the city gates before vanishing into the night. The message spread like wildfire. The dead princess lived. She commanded dragons. She was coming for the throne. Father's response was predictable. He declared me a witch, a demon, a consorter with monsters. He offered 1,000 gold dragons for my head. He conscripted every able-bodied man into his army. But fear is a poison that weakens from within. Soldiers don't fight well when they know dragons wait in the clouds. Nobles don't stay loyal when their gold can't protect them from dragonfire. And the people. The people remembered the princess who used to sneak food to orphans, who argued against father's harsh taxes, who cried when the harvest failed and children starved. They remembered and they whispered, and when I sent ravens promising justice and mercy to those who stood aside, many chose to believe. Lord Morrison was the first to publicly declare for me. I name Lyanna of House Drakenhold the rightful queen, he announced in the market square, his voice carrying over the crowd. I have seen her dragons. I have heard her promises. She offers justice where the king offers only cruelty. Father had Morrison executed, of course, but that only proved Morrison's point. More lords declared for me, slipping away from court in the night to join my growing army. Oh yes, I had an army now, not just dragons, but men and women who believed in something better. Soldiers tired of fighting wars for a mad king's ego. Farmers whose fields had been burned in Edmund's cruel games. Merchants whose businesses had been destroyed by Isabel's taxes. They came to the mountain, to the ancient fortress called Dragon's Crown that had been abandoned for centuries. We rebuilt it together, human and dragon working side by side. For the first time in my life, I had a home. A real home, with people who chose to follow me not from fear but from hope. Sir Marcus, the old weapons master who had been forced to train me as a target, arrived with 50 men. I've regretted every blow for 3 years, he told me, kneeling. Let me teach you properly now. And he did. With my dragon-enhanced strength and speed, I became the warrior father said I could never be. I learned to fight with sword and claw, to use my smaller size as an advantage, to blend human technique with dragon instinct. The war began in earnest when father marched his army north to Dragon's Crown. 30,000 men he brought, the largest force Drakenhold had ever assembled. I met them with 3,000. And 9 dragons. The Battle of Ashfields, they would call it later. Father arranged his forces in traditional formations. Infantry in the center, cavalry on the flanks, archers on the hills. Textbook tactics that had won him victories for 20 years. But textbooks don't account for dragons. Zerath and the elder dragons broke their lines before the battle even began, diving from the clouds, breathing fire that turned sand to glass, scattering horses and men like leaves before a hurricane. My bonded children and I struck at the command positions, sowing chaos and confusion. But we didn't massacre them. That was never the plan. "Soldiers of Drakenhold," I called out, my voice magically amplified to carry across the battlefield. I stood atop Ember's back, visible to all. "I am Lyanna, daughter of your king, heir to the throne he denied me. I come not to destroy, but to restore. Lay down your arms and you will be pardoned. Continue to fight for a tyrant who conscripted you against your will and face dragonfire. Choose." They chose by the thousands. Weapons fell to the ground as men dropped to their knees. Some wept with relief. Others cheered. Father's elite guard tried to maintain order, killing deserters. That's when I gave the command I'd been holding back. Protect those who surrender. Burn those who don't. The guard lasted less than an hour. Father retreated to the capital with barely 3,000 men. I could have pursued immediately, but I had a point to make. I spent a week in the field, personally speaking to every surrendered soldier. I heard their grievances, their stories of forced conscription, of families starving while nobles feasted. I had my dragons fly in food from our stores, healers for their wounded. "Why show mercy?" Sir Marcus asked. "Your father wouldn't." "Exactly, I am not my father." Word of my mercy spread faster than news of my dragons. By the time I marched on the capital, the city gates opened without a fight. The people lined the streets, not in fear, but in welcome. They threw flowers. They held up children to see the dragons. They cheered the return of their princess. Father had barricaded himself in the palace with his remaining guard, Edmund and Isabel. The siege could have lasted months. It lasted one day, because Isabel, seeing which way the wind blew, decided to make a deal. The servant girl who brought my terms to the palace returned with a message. The queen will open the servants' gate at midnight. In exchange, she asks for exile, not execution. I agreed. Isabel was a snake, but she was a useful snake. At midnight, my forces flooded the palace. The remaining guards, seeing dragons land in the courtyard, dropped their swords. I found Father in the throne room, sitting on Mother's throne. He always sat there when he was afraid, as if her ghost could protect him. Edmund stood beside him, trying to look brave and failing. "So," Father said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "The weak princess returns." "Yes, and she brought dragons." "Dragons," he laughed bitterly. "Of course. You always were too much like your mother." She heard them too, the dragon songs. I had the court physicians give her medicines to stop the voices, but they never really went away. "You mean you poisoned her?" "Slowly, over years, until her body was too weak to survive Edmund's birth." His face went white. "How could you know? Dragons remember everything, Father. Every cruelty, every murder, every extinction." I stepped closer, and my dragons followed, filling the throne room with their presence. Zerath remembers his mate, whose skull decorates this room. Nightfall remembers her daughter, whose scales you wear. And I remember every blow, every humiliation, every moment you tried to break me. Edmund suddenly rushed forward, sword raised. "You're still weak, still..." Shadow's tail caught him mid-charge, sending him flying into a pillar. I heard bones break as he crumpled to the floor, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just empty acknowledgement that the boy who had tormented me was finally facing consequences. Father stood, reaching for his own blade. I should have drowned you at birth. Yes, I agreed. As Sundays, you should have. Because then you might have lived. The fight was embarrassingly short. 3 years of dragon training against an old man drunk on his own legend. I disarmed him in 4 moves, knocked him to his knees in 6. Kill me then, he snarled. Show everyone you're the monster I always said you were. No. I turned to the court that had gathered. Nobles who had laughed at my humiliation, servants who had watched in silence, guards who had followed orders. Bear witness, I called out. I am Lyanna of House Drakenhold, blood of the Dragon Lords, heir to the throne of our ancestors. I claim my birthright not by weakness, but by strength. Not by cruelty, but by justice. The old reign dies today. I looked back at Father. You will be tried, publicly. Every crime will be announced, every victim will speak. And when your guilt is proven, which it will be, you will face the traditional punishment for treason against the crown. You can't. I am the king. No. I picked up the crown that had fallen from his head, the crown that had never been meant for me. You were the king. The trial lasted 3 days. Lord came forward with grievances. Mothers whose sons had died in pointless wars. Merchants driven to poverty by impossible taxes. Servants bearing scars from royal whims. Edmund, recovered enough to stand trial, faced his own accusations. The women he'd hurt were the bravest, standing in front of the kingdom to name their abuser. By the end, even those who had supported my family couldn't deny their guilt. Isabel, in exchange for her cooperation, testified about the poisonings, the secret executions, the funds diverted from the treasury to personal coffers. The verdict was unanimous. At dawn on the 4th day, I stood on the execution platform. Father and Edmund knelt before the block, defiant to the end. Any last words? I asked. Father spat at my feet. You're still weak, needing dragons to win your battles. Perhaps, but I'd rather be weak with allies than strong and alone. The executioner's blade fell twice. Clean, quick, merciful. More than they had ever given anyone. But I wasn't done. Bring out the statue, I commanded. My people had worked in secret for weeks on this final statement. A statue of Father and Edmund, carved in perfect detail, showing them as they truly were, cruel, grasping, afraid. We placed it in the town square with a plaque. Here stand the last tyrants of Drakenhold. May we never forget the price of cruelty. Within a month, it became tradition to throw rotten fruit at the statue. Within a year, children played a game called Topple the Tyrant, where they tried to knock it over with stones. I let them. Memory could be its own punishment. The coronation took place on the 1st day of spring. The throne room had been rebuilt, the dragon's skull removed and returned to Zerath for proper burial, the cold white marble replaced with warm golden stone. Windows were added to let in light and air, and perches built for my dragons to attend court. I stood before the throne in armor of my own design, not the heavy plate my father favored, but scale mail that moved like water, forged from scales my dragon children had shed. The crown was new too, simpler than Father's gaudy thing, a circlet of black iron with a single dragon crystal at its center. Will you take the oath? The High Septon asked. I will. Will you rule with justice, not vengeance? With strength, not cruelty? With wisdom, not fear? I will. Will you protect the innocent, uplift the downtrodden, and remember that a crown is a burden, not a prize? I will. He placed the crown on my head, and the weight was nothing compared to what I'd already carried. Rise, Queen Lyanna of House Drakenhold, first of her name, the Dragon Queen, breaker of chains, protector of the realm. The throne room erupted in genuine celebration. Not the forced pageantry of Father's court, but real joy. My dragons roared in harmony, a sound that shook the palace and could be heard throughout the city. I sat on the throne, Mother's throne, now mine, and looked out at my court. Lord Morrison's son stood as my hand, determined to honor his father's memory. Sir Marcus led my Queensguard. Former rebels and loyalists stood side by side, united in hope for something better. Your Majesty, Morrison said, your first supplicants await. They were children, orphans from the war, brought by the woman who ran the city orphanage. Please, Your Majesty, the woman said, trembling. We have no more food, no money for repairs. The previous king said orphans weren't the crown's responsibility. I stood from the throne and walked down to them, kneeling so I was eye level with the youngest child, a girl perhaps 5 with eyes that had seen too much. What's your name? I asked. Sarah, she whispered. Well, Sarah, the previous king was wrong. You are all the crown's responsibility. And more than that, you're under my personal protection. I looked up at the matron. The crown will fund the orphanage fully. New buildings, regular meals, education for any who want it, and, I smiled, would the children like to meet some dragons? The squeals of delight were answer enough. That set the tone for my reign. Where father had ruled from above, I walked among my people. Where he had hoarded wealth, I shared it. Where he had demanded fear, I earned respect. Not everything was smooth. Some nobles resented losing their privileges. Some generals thought a woman couldn't lead armies. Some merchants grumbled about new taxes on luxury goods to fund public works. But it's hard to argue with a queen who has 9 dragons. Harder still when that queen's policies actually worked. Within a year, the kingdom's treasury was recovering. Trade flourished under new, fairer laws. The armies, no longer sent to fight pointless wars, helped rebuild infrastructure. And the dragons became symbols of protection, not fear. My children would play with the city's youngsters, giving them rides. Zerath established a library in his mountain, teaching those who wished to learn the old knowledge. The elder dragons helped with construction, their fire forging stronger steel, their strength moving stones no human could lift. We became something new, not just a kingdom, but a partnership between species. The Dragon Realm, they started calling us. Scholars came from across the world to study in our libraries. Warriors came to train with our dragon riders. For yes, I had begun a program for worthy individuals to bond with future dragon eggs under strict supervision. 3 years into my reign, I received a visitor, a woman in rags, thin and haunted, asking for an audience. It was Isabel. Her exile had not been kind. Without money or connections, she had struggled to survive. She looked older, frailer, more human than the cold queen who had tormented me. Why return? I asked. You know the terms of your exile. I'm dying, she said simply. A growth in my stomach. The healers say months at most. She met my eyes. Came to beg forgiveness and to tell you something you deserve to know. Speak. Your mother, she wasn't mad. You were right about the poisoning, but not about why. Your father feared her because she was strong, because she heard the dragon songs and he knew what that meant. He knew that any child of hers might inherit the gift. Then why let me live? He thought he had broken you, thought the gift had passed you by. He was wrong. She coughed, blood speckling her lips. I was wrong, we all were. I could have gloated, could have thrown her past cruelties in her face, could have had her executed for breaking exile. Instead, I had her taken to the palace healers. Why? Sir Marcus asked. After everything she did? Because I am not her. I am not any of them. I choose mercy, not because they deserve it, but because I do. Isabella died 2 months later, peacefully, in a warm bed. Her last words were, "The kingdom is in good hands." 5 years have passed since I took the throne. The young girl they called weak now rules the most powerful kingdom in the known world. The dragons have clutches of their own now, carefully managed, bonded to worthy riders who serve the realm. We've established schools where children, noble and common alike, learn together. We've built hospitals where healing is free to all who need it. We've created a council where representatives from every province have a voice in governance. Edmund's dungeons have been converted into a museum, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. Father's statue still stands in the square, though it's been worn smooth by years of thrown fruit and righteous anger. Sometimes I stand at my window and watch children play Topple the Tyrant, and I remember the girl who once cowered at his feet. That girl is gone. In her place stands a queen who earned her throne through fire and blood, who turned rejection into strength, who made allies of ancient enemies. They said I was too weak to rule. They were wrong. I stand on my balcony now, watching the sun set over a kingdom at peace. Ember curls around my feet, no longer the size of a cat, but a magnificent beast who could level cities. In the distance, I can see Zerath teaching young dragons to fly, their shadows dancing across the mountains. A knock at my door interrupts my thoughts. Morrison enters, carrying reports. Your Majesty, we've received word from the Northern Kingdoms. They request an alliance, offering favorable trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The same kingdoms that laughed when father offered me in marriage to their worst sons? The very same. It seems your reputation has changed their perspective. I smile. Draft a response. We'll consider their offer, but on our terms. And Morrison, make sure they understand that this queen's strength isn't just in her dragons. Of course, Your Majesty, though the dragons don't hurt. We share a laugh, and I return to the window. Somewhere out, there are other kingdoms ruled by tyrants, other princes and princesses deemed too weak to matter. Perhaps one day they too will find their dragons, literal or metaphorical. Perhaps they too will rise from the ashes of others' cruelty, but that's their story to write. Mine is here, in this throne room that once echoed with my screams and now rings with justice. In this crown that was never meant for my head but fits perfectly. In these dragons that answered the call of a broken girl and helped her become an unbreakable queen. They said I was too weak to rule. Now none dare say it to my face. Not because they fear my wrath, though they should, but because the evidence stands before them. A kingdom prosperous, a people protected, a realm where strength isn't measured in cruelty but in the courage to be kind when you have the power to be cruel. I think Mother would be proud. I know Zerath is.